Welcome to the Breech Birth Podcast. I'm Sasha Hopkins, private midwife, breech birth educator, and your host. This is a space to hear the real, raw, and powerful stories of women who have experienced breech birth in all its layers. Each episode features honest conversations with women who've experienced breech firsthand, offering insight and reflection. This podcast was born from the knowing that these stories need to be heard to inform, connect, and reclaim the story of breech birth. Whether you're navigating breech birth yourself, supporting others, or simply curious, welcome and thank you. Hi, Raquel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sasha. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to give some context. You've got a few stories to share. Would you mind sharing what year your breech babies were born?
Yes, there were 3 of them. There was 2004, 2019, and then 2022.
Amazing. And what kind of care did you have in the pregnancy, birth, and postpartum for each of those?
For my first 2 were OB hospital care, and for my last one was OB home birth.
And how many weeks were you with each of them when they were born?
My first one was 38 weeks. My second breech was 40 weeks, and my last breech was 41 and 2 days.
Longer and longer.
Yeah.
And you had vaginal or cesarean for those?
For my first 2, I had C-section, and for my last one, I had a vaginal birth.
Amazing. And you've shared with me you've had a head down baby amongst those as well. So we'll get a little snapshot of what that birth was as well. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself before we get started?
After my 4th baby, I got really deep into doula work. So that's been really rewarding. And I also am the podcast manager and assistant to Birthing Instincts podcast for Dr. Stu and Midwife Bliss. So I feel like I'm always in birth, which I really love. And it's been amazing being able to give back to a community that helped me to really get to where I was able to get that 4th baby out vaginally.
Yeah, amazing. Big fan of Birthing Instincts. So would you like to start with your first story?
Yeah. So my first one, my son, I was 19, so I was really young, and everything was normal. Everything was great. But when I got to 36 weeks, the doctor said, oh, baby is still breech or is breech. So your only option is a C-section. He said that there was a doctor 45 minutes away that could potentially deliver my baby vaginally, but he had already told me about the risk of head entrapment and cord prolapse and all of these scary things, and that if it was his daughter, he would never recommend her to have a vaginal breech birth. But if I wanted to, there's this doctor on the way. I'm 19. I don't really have any family support. The internet really wasn't an accessible tool at the time. We used it for school projects, but it wasn't like on our phone or at most people's phones. And if I did use it, it was just for email. And so I was too scared to try a vaginal birth, so I went for a C-section. Everything went well. I remember everything. You know, they put the epidural in, they laid me down, they cut me open, and out he came. He did have a little jaundice, so we did stay in the hospital for extra days. So we were there for about 5 days, which is the max we were allowed to stay. And then we went home, and he was great. He's my first little guy. So at that time, there was a vaginal VBAC ban. So the doctor had told me how if I had a C-section, I'd always be a C-section. That it wasn't, something I wouldn't have to worry about. I would just come in and have baby C-section. And it asked me how many babies I wanted to have. And I was like, oh, I think I just want to have 2 babies. At 19, I had my whole life planned ahead of me. And he said, well, that's fine. Perfect.
And just for those in Australia to understand the setting, it was a private obstetrician that you had. Is that right?
Yes. So California in the United States it varies. So he was my OB. He's going to be my OB for the whole time. And then there's other groups where you sign up for like a group of OBs. So mine was an individual sole provider. So he was my caretaker for the whole time.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. And just jumping back into the pregnancy side of things, were there any issues in pregnancy for you in your first pregnancy?
I loved being pregnant. It was really easy for me. I didn't have like any morning sickness. I was feeling great. I mean, I got tired a little bit, but other than that, it was like super smooth sailing. And that's kind of how all my pregnancies have been. And I really enjoyed pregnancy in general. Just the very end when like, oh, you have a breech baby, like you can't have a vaginal birth, and my whole world kind of stutters. The first time they told me I was really devastated. I was really excited about like the potential of I guess not the potential, but like the birth story that I would have to tell. Like where was I and how did labor start and who was with me and how did my water break? Like all these things that you're excited about was really ripped from me in an instant. And it took me some time to kind of grieve that loss that I was going to be essentially told you're going to go at this time and you're going to, wear this and put this soap on and come at this time and this is going to be here. Like everything was scheduled out and planned out for me. So it's really sad, but my baby had to be born one way or another. It just kind of, it is what it was. And I just kind of surrendered to like, this is going to be his birth story.
Yeah. And with that first cesarean experience, did you know much about your options? Did you have the option to have delayed cord clamping? Could you play music? Were there preferences that you could put in place for that setting?
No, I knew nothing. I just kind of went blindly in and followed doctor's orders and laid there and they took baby out, clipped his cord and off he went. I think there was a good 45 minutes, hour or so before I got to actually hold him. So back then for my first, he was born. They clean him up. He's crying. I'm crying because I can't hold him. And then they bring him over to me. They put his little face next to my face and they whisk him away. So it was really very quick. And they stitched me up and close everything. And then I get wheeled into the recovery room where I finally get to kind of hang out with him and meet him for like the first time. So it was hard.
Yeah. And did you breastfeed at all?
They did.
Yeah. How was that journey for you?
It was hard. I think your first is always hard. Kind of, it's like there's a learning curve of how this works for both of us. But once he got down, it was great. I had oversupply, so that was kind of my only struggle. Was I couldn't go anywhere because every time I nursed him on one side, the other side would just explode. Milk was always changing my clothes, but it calmed down after a bit, and we got a really good cycle. And he nursed for about 10 months, and then he kind of weaned himself. I'd gone back to work. So my milk kind of started to slowly go away, and eventually he kind of just weaned himself, and that was the end of our breastfeeding journey.
Amazing. Nowadays, they've got these awesome little cups that collect the letdown. They didn't have those when I had my babies. So, yeah, you just leak. So then your next baby, do you want to just start from the beginning when you decided to fall pregnant again? Was it a surprise? What did that look like? And what was the time frame between the two?
Sure. It was about 2.5 years later. My partner and I, he just didn't like me on birth control. He's like, I think we're done. And I said, okay. But we didn't really want to get pregnant again. We just didn't want to use birth control. I got pregnant again. And I think because the first time it took us so long to get pregnant, not that we were trying, but just timing, I guess. So we didn't really think it would happen that fast, and it did. But it was 2.5 year gap between the two of them from birth to birth. And it was pretty easy again. She was head down, which was another disappointment because, I can have a vaginal birth. It's like, no, we've got the VBAC man. I was like, okay. So that was really disappointing.
And she was head down the whole time?
Yeah. So I guess I have a bicornuate uterus.
Yeah.
And so my babies have a hard time turning, but she was a pound smaller. So I'm assuming that took some, play into how she was able to flip. And she's very determined. So I'm gonna go with those two things combined really helped her get head down. But yeah, she was head down for I think the whole time. And then eventually we just went for a C-section at 39 weeks. With same OB, I remember nothing from that birth. I think the first birth was so traumatic of just being that cut off of not being able to hold my baby or see him for like an hour after he was born was really hard for me. And so the second time around when I try to recall like her birth story, I don't know. I don't remember anything. Definitely not as vividly as my firstborn, where I can remember like the texture of my doctor's shirt and like everything I can remember. And for hers, I know I was there. There's pictures, but that's about all I remember, unfortunately, from her birth was that it happened and then we got home.
Yeah. Okay. So same sort of thing. Didn't have delayed cord clamping or skin to skin. It was just a little face to face and then whisked off.
Yeah.
And breastfed?
Yes, she was breastfed. Same amount of time.
Yeah.
10 months ish.
And so then your third journey, what was the time frame between then and falling pregnant again? Was it a plan or a sneaky surprise again? What did that look like?
No, that one was more planned.
Yeah.
So the first two, I separated from my partner not too long after we had our second baby. And then I was single for a long time. And then I met my husband, 2017, I think somewhere in there, about 10 years later. And he had told me that he wanted to have children. And I was like, well, no, I had my two, I'm done. It was really important to him to have at least one. I said, okay, well, we'll have one. But I really didn't want to have a C-section again. So I started doing research at that time of what my options might be. And the internet was now like on my phone. And we had a larger community at that time. And so I had one friend that I played roller derby with, and she said, hey, there's this doctor, Dr. Stu Fishbein, and he does breech delivery. And I said, well, that's really dangerous. She's like, no, you should probably look into him. I said, okay. And so I did. And I got really comfortable with the thought of a breech birth. And this was before I got pregnant. We were just dating, but he said he wanted to have a baby. I have this need to research and plan things ahead. So very early on while we were dating, I started just researching breech birth and then VBAC. And I realized that it wasn't as scary as maybe the first doctor had painted it out to be, and that a VBAC could possibly be an option for me still. And coincidentally, that year that I met my husband, we have a local ICANN chapter, International Caesarean Awareness Network. We have a very active chapter here in our town, and they were going to have a panel on VBAC. And so I went, and Dr. Stu was there. And so I got
Wow.
to meet him and kind of learn more about my options. And so at that time, I knew that I was at least going to ask about that possibility if I got pregnant again. And sure enough, we got married, and I immediately got pregnant. And so we started to plan, and I went to my OB, a new OB, and because my old doctor had retired, and she said she would support me to do a VBAC, but it maybe had to be head down. So I said, okay, I got a 50-50 chance. And so I
Yeah.
went to that doctor that I was originally told about my first birth in 2004. But I went to him and I said, hey, doc, like I tend to have breech babies. I hear you deliver breech. Would you be willing to support me in a VBAC after two C-sections? And he's like, no, I can't do that here. We could do it after one, but I can't do it after two, hospital policy. I was like, okay. I did everything that I could that pregnancy to get that baby to turn. We did moxibustion and chiropractor and acupuncture and spinning babies and ice packets and music, and nothing was helping. So I ended up having a repeat C-section with my OB in town.
And how many weeks were you when you discovered this bub was breech?
36.
36. Okay. And how did you feel? Because you were so proactive in changing this next journey and still couldn't find someone.
That was definitely, I think, a real emotional roller coaster, because you had this chance of like maybe tried everything and it didn't work, and that was so disappointing. And so I think when we went in there, I was just sad that I knew my possibilities, but hospitals just have these rules and regulations that stop me from being able to do what I wanted. And I couldn't have a midwife because midwives in California aren't allowed to attend breech births. That was also an option I looked into. And I asked Dr. Stu, but Dr. Stu was a little out of my price range because we were in escrow at the time to buy our home. And so I was like, oh, unfortunately, I just can't afford his services at this time. So my hands were tied. So that was kind of frustrating. It's like, I know what I want, and there's doctors who are trained to do what I want, but hospital policy says no. So that was frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine. Just going back, do you know what type of breech your first and your second were?
I have no idea.
No idea? Okay.
I have no idea. My third breech was a complete breech, but I don't know what my first two were.
And breastfed your third, Bubba?
He overlapped during COVID time, so he got to breastfeed for a lot longer. He was a couple years. He was born 2019, in August 2019, and then went in lockdown in March of 2020. Oh, we had a lot of bonding time.
Amazing. And so then lucky last, what was the time frame? What lead up to the journey? Because you said you're only going to have one more with your husband.
Yeah.
Obviously that didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, oops. I can't say she was an oops baby, but it was one of those things where we're like, well, maybe we'll have another one, maybe not. We were talking about it, and I ended up being pregnant, so that just happened. But at this time, we were much more like situated, our home settled, and she was born 3 years later. So we were prepared. And I actually had learned a lot more in my doula work and advocacy about better navigating the hospital system.
So when did you become a doula amongst this?
I think just all the research that I did to go for a VBAC and to try for a breech birth, I was in it so much that my friends started just kind of coming to me, asking me questions about birth and babies and options, and I would just kind of
Yep.
encourage them. And so that kind of led into.
So after your third or your second that you kind of started doing that work?
It was after my third that I kind of started. I just kind of started being like an informational resource and like helping moms and my friends. Yeah. And then it was until after my fourth that I really dove into it. So with her, I told my husband I wanted. My husband's in sales, so he's very like financially. I don't know what you want to call it, but he's a numbers kind of guy. So he's like, well, let's compare the two. Let's compare a home birth versus a hospital birth, and then we'll talk about the options. I said, okay. So I went back to the doctor in Ventura that does breech birth that told me no with my third, and I said, hey doc, like you do breech delivery, and when I was here last time, listen, I'm 3 C-sections in, but you do breech. Would you support me to do a vaginal breech birth after 3 C-sections? And he's like, no, no, I told you that last time. And I said, well, I understand that. I said, but can you force me into having a procedure that I'm not consenting to? And his face just kind of went blank and his shoulders went down and he's just like, well, I can't. I said, okay, then will you support me? And he's like, I guess I have to. He said, but you can't tell the hospital that I'm like supporting you. You have to tell them that you're going against my recommendation and that you're being stubborn and that you want this vaginal birth. And then I have no choice but to support you. I said, okay, that's fine. I can do that. And then I went to Stu and I said, hey, Stewie, or hi, Dr. Stu, I'm back. Are you able to do a VBAC at home after 3 C-sections with the breech still? Because that's still something you can support during a home birth. And he's like, sure, let's talk about it. So we talked about it. We had a consult. We did some numbers. There's not a whole lot of research on VBACs after 3 C-sections. So we did some like in theory kind of things. And I said, I think I'm still comfortable with that. Like I'm totally down if you're down. And he's like, yeah, I'm down to do this. But he was going on sabbatical. This is right when he was about to like retire and move to Utah. And I was like, oh man, I really, I've come so far and now you're leaving. But he had somebody that was kind of taking over his practice and been practicing under his wing for a while. So I met her and she was just as amazing. So I felt really comfortable with her. But I had been listening to his podcast for years at this point, and like I had really bonded to his voice. He just, he obviously doesn't know because it's a very one-sided relationship at this point.
Yeah.
And so, when it came closer to her due date, the person that had taken over, her name was Dr. Flores. She was going on vacation. My due date was 4th of July, and she was going to go on vacation, and I hadn't gone into labor yet. And so, Dr. Stu had flown in to take over for when she was going to check out. And so what had happened was I was at dinner with a friend and I started feeling like these tingling sensations in my back. And I was like, well, that's kind of funny. I've never felt that before. And it went away and it would come back and then go away. And I was starting to notice them. And so when I left dinner, I'm gonna go home. I might not see you for a while because I think I'm gonna have a baby today. And he's like, okay, well, go for it. And when I checked my phone, Dr. Flores had texted me and she says, hey, just so you know, as of right now, like Dr. Stu's your doctor. He's on call now. I'm checked out. I'm on vacation. Oh, do I tell her that I'm in labor? I think I'm in labor. I was like, no, because I don't know for sure. I've never been in labor before. I've never experienced this. I have no idea what this might be. And turns out I was in labor. And so I went home. I kind of cleaned my bathroom a little bit, just a little extra. And I tried to rest and I couldn't rest. And I was like, no, I'm definitely in labor. So around 10 o'clock that night, I let my team know, hey, just so you guys know, things are happening. And that was kind of it. And then, then I had her at 7 a.m. the next morning.
So what did that labour look like? What sort of pain relief options? Did you need anything?
Yeah. So one of my doulas came. She got there probably around midnight and she was doing counter pressure. So that was really helpful. I used a toilet, the relaxation station or dilation station, we call it. That was really nice. I rested. I just did it backwards. So I always call it reverse cowgirl, but that's not how you call it. But basically, I faced the water tank with the pillow and I just kind of laid there for a while. And that was really nice because I had to pee every contraction. I was like, contraction, go to the bathroom, contraction, go to the bathroom. So ultimately, I'm just going to sit here for a little while. And so that's what I did. And then eventually I got bored and so I moved around and counter pressure was amazing. I focused a lot on meditation. So I just really worked on focusing my mind on what's happening to my body is natural and my baby's just, making her way down and everything's going to be great, and just really surrendering to the process and sinking into it instead of trying to fight the contraction. That was immensely helpful. I would never really describe my labor as painful. I would describe it as uncomfortable and a lot of pressure, but I never really felt pain. It was more like just intense period cramping. Eventually, Dr. Stu got there and they did a cervical check to see how I was doing because we didn't know. I had never been in labor before, how I was really progressing. There was meconium in my when my water broke, but that's pretty normal for a breech birth. So he wasn't too worried about that, but knew that that meant that she was making her way down. So that was reassuring to him. And then when he checked me, I think I was like 7 centimeters or something like that. I don't really remember, but I fully effaced and everything. So
Amazing.
yeah, it wasn't that long that I was in labor for. I felt like everything was going pretty quickly. So eventually I had to get into the birth tub when we set up a birth tub in my living room. And that was amazing. And I almost fell asleep in there, but then my contractions started to pick up and they were like doubling up in some points. And so that was getting frustrated. I was like, I can't do that. I'm so tired. And I'm like, oh no, you got this. And I did. And so eventually, I started to get pushy. And so Dr. Stu came into the room and we got kind of situated into I wanted to be on all fours when I pushed her out. So I got onto all fours. He wasn't excited about the water, but that's okay.
Did you have the older children around? Were they at the home?
My 2 older were around. My son is a photographer, so there's a video out there, Badass Mother Birther. I gave her the video to post, so she has it, and sometimes it circulates, and he's asking, "Where's the photographer?" I was like, "Oh, the photographer is my 17-year-old son who was starting to be uneasy about watching his mom in labor, so he disappeared for a minute, recomposed himself, and came back out." So that was really cute. My daughter was there the whole time. Youngest son was asleep, so he kinda slept through everything, and he woke up probably minutes after she was born. So when she was born, I was pushing, and at some point, I think the cord got compressed or something, so it started getting really flat and not full anymore. So Stu's like, "Let's get her out." So he stood me up and took out her arms, and then did a shoulder press, and she was
Mm-hmm.
out seconds. She did need some extra help just to kind of come fully into her body, which I'd seen before in videos. I was prepared for breech babies typically come out needing more assistance, and so she definitely was in that category. And eventually she came around and she was crying and she did great and she's amazing. And my son came out shortly after that and he saw her like half asleep. And my 2 sons, my older one and the baby, had been watching like The Walking Dead recently for some reason. So he was like, "Mom, zombies," and he like makes it sound. I was like, "Okay." So he sees his baby sister's like, "Oh, like a zombie." I was like, "No, she's not a zombie." She still had, her like birth on her, and and then he eventually realized like, "Oh, it's my sister," and they're so close. They all are really close with her. Uh, older two and my youngest one. It's really sweet to watch.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And what did that immediate postpartum look like for you? You were in the pool for the birth, but then did you say you got out for the maneuvers?
Yeah, well, I just stood up. He wanted me to move to the couch, which was like 2 feet away. Well, there's no way I'm gonna have a baby half dangling out of me and get to a couch. I just stood up and he maneuvered her out.
And did you sit back in the water once you had her, or did you hop out?
Yeah, so he kind of like swooped her through my legs and I had her on my chest. I sat back down in the pool and you can hear me apologizing to her. And
Mm.
people are like, "Why are you apologizing to her? Like, you did a great job." And I couldn't vocalize, like, I couldn't connect to her. I wasn't allowing myself to feel that she was my baby and I was her mom. I had so many C-sections where you birth them out of your tummy and then they kind of get taken away. And so I didn't know what it felt like. No, she's here. She's mine. She's going to stay. So I'm like, I'm sorry. Cause I know I should have rubbed her a little bit more. Stu eventually patted her back to get her to cough up whatever, she had in her system. And I knew, but I was frozen. I couldn't, and I felt so bad. I was just waiting for someone to take her from me. And eventually he kind of just really gently took her, but kept her still touching me and like patted her back and gave her right back. And he put his hand on my head and he's like, "You did it." And in that moment, I realized like, oh no, she's not going anywhere. She's right here. She's going to stay with me. And so I like just squeezed her a little more and I sunk into it. And that's the moment that I realized like she's mine. And I don't have to give her up and I don't have to wait an hour to hold her. Like I can allow myself to feel for her. And that was probably something that I didn't really know that I was going to feel. I didn't realize how traumatic it was for me to lose my babies immediately after birth. So that was really healing. But also I felt guilty, that my other babies didn't get that. And that was kind of robbed of that from my previous C-sections. Even if they could have given me like gentle C-sections, like let me hold her or him and bond with them, but you lose that. And it was really hard. But yeah, so that was probably the most magical moment is sitting with her and knowing I didn't have to give her to anybody. And we stayed that way for like 5 days, like in my bed, nobody else held her but me. They took her eventually after I birthed my placenta, and she was, we were just kind of laying having snacks, and then they took her and they weighed her and measured her and everything. But I got so much time with her before they had her, and
Had she had a breastfeed as well before that?
oh yeah, she was a champ.
Yeah. And did
Yeah.
you birth your placenta in the pool or did you hop out for that?
Placenta, I birthed outside of it because he wanted to be able. I think there was some bleeding, and so he wanted to make sure that everything was okay. So he got me out of the pool so he could better gauge the bleeding, and it was fine. But then eventually he helped me because it was still in there. So he helped just kind of massage my uterus.
And do you do anything with the placentas? Had you kept the placentas for the others or even know that you could?
No, I didn't. I've heard about it, but it wasn't something that I had ever done. So this time, yes, my doula had taken my placenta and she left some of it for me to have in like smoothies and then took the rest of it and encapsulated it for me. So that was kind of different. It was really interesting.
Yeah, very different from your other experiences, and such a beautiful reflection and insight after that birth to realize that this is your baby and no one's taking them, and how that affected you, not realizing how much it affected you from your others. It's really beautiful to hear. And so that postpartum journey with your last, what did that look like?
My doctor came to me.
Great. Is that up to 6 weeks?
Yeah, he came a couple days later, and then a couple weeks later, and then my last appointment was, I think, 6 weeks later, and now we work together, so he sees me all the time.
Yeah.
Her name is Adelina, and watches her grow up, and she talks to him on the computer, and it's really sweet, but we had never really lost contact. But yeah, after 6 weeks, he kinda left and went back home, and but yeah, it was really nice. We had a great time. She nursed right away and she just is such a happy baby. They were all really happy babies, but I think her breastfeeding was like the easiest one that I had to like latch.
And did you have midwifery care alongside of that with Dr. Stu and Dr. Flores, or was that something separate you had to invest in?
So during my prenatals, it was just with the OB. And then at the birth, it was my OB. And then I also had a midwife there. So that was all a part of Dr. Stu's team. So when I hired him, it included having the midwife there. And then for my postpartum checkups, they were all just with Dr. Stu, and then a midwife would come join him. But primarily, he was the one doing my checkups, and then she would check up on the baby.
Okay. And I love that you easily just manifested that with Dr. Stu. What divine timing.
There was this time that he came to Santa Barbara to record the podcast like live, and I went to go watch, and I was like probably 8 months pregnant, I think, at that time. And I told him, I said, I'm really nervous. I don't really know who's going to be in my birth. He's just like, he hugged me. He's like, it's going to be fine. He's like, whoever's supposed to be there will be there. And I was like, okay, I trust you, And sure enough, it was.
He was there.
Yeah.
That's great. I have a question about your bicornuate uterus. So just for those listening, a bicornuate is a heart-shaped uterus, and usually you have a septum that goes through midway of the uterus. So you have two sections. Do you know what side each of them developed on?
No, I don't know which side. I've got a picture of it, so I'd have to send it. But at the end, I don't know which side they ended up on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, because your egg can release. You've got one on each side, each fallopian tube, so they can release on either side. So you could have one, first baby develops on the right side and the second baby develops on the left. So it's just something I'm curious about.
Yeah, I definitely have one side that's bigger than the other, so I'm assuming they went to the bigger side. But I'll have to check the ultrasound to see what that looked like.
Yeah.
I don't remember right
This is
now.
interesting.
One of the things that you get when it's bicornuate uterus is that the limits is the movement, and so you are more prone to breech babies. So it's really fascinating. And they kind of figured that out in my first birth when he was doing an ultrasound. That when he changed from side to side, like I think you might have a heart-shaped uterus, but we won't know until the baby's born and we see it. And then when the baby was born, they took out my uterus, and they was like, "Oh no, it's definitely heart shaped." So they called it my cuterus.
That's cute. I like it. So, having the experiences that you've had now and knowing what you know, if you fell pregnant again, had a breech baby, would you do anything differently? You've had a few different experiences. So, if there's anything in particular that you're like, oh, I'd do that again, or I wouldn't do this again, would you mind sharing that?
I've thought about it because who knows? I don't plan to have any more, but Stu is gone and I don't really have anybody else that I really trust wholeheartedly in Breech. That was really a key into my success, I think, is that I really trusted my birth team. And so with him being gone, I think it'd be a really hard decision for me.
Is Dr. Flores still in the area?
Dr. Flores is still practicing,
Yeah.
but she's kind of limited in her availability. I do have a doctor here locally that I thought about doing a gentle cesarean with if it happened again, where I would like get to help birth the baby myself.
By gentle cesarean, you mean like a maternal assisted where you're scrubbed up and you have gloves? Yeah, okay.
So that would be my last resort if I couldn't find another OB to come and help attend my birth.
I think you kind of mentioned already, but would you recommend any resources or education for any woman listening now that has a breech baby on board?
Yeah, absolutely. Stu and Breach Without Borders are probably the two best resources that I use. Breach Without Borders has some great training videos. It really teaches you like the mechanics of birth, which if you understand them, it really kind of helps ease the fear, but also teaches you that like with a skilled provider, it really is almost safer than a head down delivery. Because when the baby's coming out bottom first, and my daughter was actually born feet first because when they're complete, their feet can slip out first. And so that's what happened to her. And it kind of just gives you more handles to work with. So that if there is a situation that's happening, you can really read the baby as the baby's coming down by reading the cord and the, tummy crunches and all that really gives you a lot of signs about how the baby is doing. And if they need assistance, they've got limbs that you can hold on to. Or a head down baby, you really don't know how that baby's doing until that baby's born. And there's nothing to grip onto other than a head, and you can't just grab a baby by the head,
Yeah.
So that's what I learned to Breach Without Borders and Dr. Stu is really how it works, which helped give me the confidence in my decision and hearing other birth stories. But the birth stories was more to help me with the VBAC confidence because hearing other success stories was really helpful for me. So yeah, that was key. Watching Breech birth was really, really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. The Breech Without Borders have an online course for parents and birth attendants called Breech 101. So I usually recommend that to my clients who are expecting a breech baby, just to be very clear of what to expect and have a really good understanding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice that you would like to give to anyone listening?
My words of advice are always very generic and apply to head down or any babies, but I always say lie about your due date because I think that was probably the most stressful part of my vaginal birth was once I got to 40 weeks, people were like, how's it go? You're still pregnant? And I was like, God, leave me alone. So many people that I hadn't even heard from in so long, and they all have great intentions and they mean so well, and I love them all for it. But there's just this point where and I'm in the summertime. It's hot. I'm pregnant. I want to not be pregnant anymore. And they just are blowing up my phone. At some point, I was like, just take my phone away. So that was probably the most stressful part of my pregnancy was navigating people just wanting to know how she was doing. You will know when you will know. So I always say lie. Just tell them it's like really later than it really is. And then that way you don't have to deal with that.
Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately, people are a bit nosy.
It's so exciting. But yeah, they don't realize how many people are actually reaching out to you at the same time and how miserable you are. Oh, can I add
Yeah.
one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Taking an out of hospital birth education class is really helpful to help you have like a healthy pregnancy and how to navigate labor and even the hospital system. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. It's been absolutely beautiful to hear, and learn from you, and what a journey that you've had.
Of course. Thank you again so much for having me. I always love telling her birth story.
Thank you for listening to the Breech Birth podcast. These stories matter. They stretch what we think we know and bring voice to experiences that need to be heard. I'm so grateful to the women who have shared their experiences with us, raw, real, and full of wisdom. If this episode resonated with you, please follow, share, or leave a review. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Breech Birth Podcast. And if you have a breech story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, may we continue to reclaim the narrative, one story at a time.